What's up, guys? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and today we go back to that one time that Hikaru Nakamura played the Bongcloud in a tournament game. He found himself playing with white against Super GM Jeffrey Zhang in the 2020 Saint Luis Rapid Blitz, and at this point, both Magnus Carlsen and Wesley So were ahead of him, and with it being the final round, with no chance of Nakamura being able to win the tournament, we see him start this game off with e4, and now against e5, the troll opening of King e2, with the Bongcloud. This opening move is bad for a number of reasons, but we now see black respond with knight f6, wasting no time and attacking the centralized pawn on e4, in which case Nakamura responds with d3, really putting these pawns on light squares. And as you guys are going to see, Nakamura really tries to hold the fort in this game, really trying to support this pawn on e4 as much as possible. In fact, right now, black starts off with d5, wasting no time, trying to put as much pressure on that e4 pawn as possible. But here Nakamura doesn't capture on d5 and open this game up. We are in a defensive stance. We literally have a king on e2, and this king is a big target. There's no reason to open things up. Instead, we should just continue with a move such as knight d2. Whole idea being, okay, if you want to take on e4, we'll simply capture back. And here, if a move like knight c6, we now can play c3 as seen in the game, really trying to limit the activity of this knight on c6, preventing it from coming to b4, and most importantly, d4 with potential checks against our king on e2. So really by playing this move as c3, we're trying to limit the activity and compromise this knight on c6. And here from Zhang, we see this move of b6, looking to fianchetto head of this light-scored bishop, and now Nakamura continuing with queen c2, really just trying to give this pawn on e4 as much support as possible. And now against the move bishop b7, we see knight gf3, just naturally developing our pieces and putting a little bit of pressure on e5. And now the very next move, continuing with b4. And this really shows that the purpose of c3 is two-sided. First off, we are defending that key square of d4, but we're also defending the square of b4 and giving ourselves potential b4 ideas in the future, expanding on the queen side. And as you guys are going to see, us creating the space on the queen side is going to pay off later on in this game. Zhang responds by castling queenside, a very interesting but strong move, really forming a battery ram on the d-file, making it so white has to be very careful to not lose this game very quickly. We see Nakamura continue now with a3, and this is often how he approaches the Bongcloud. He puts his pawn on e4, followed by this very bad king e2 move, but following this, we see ideas like d3 and c3, tucking our queen on c2 and our knight on d2 while expanding on the queen side of the board. And sure, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that white has a great position here, but at the same time, how does black get an easy win against it? We actually just see this move of king b8. Oftentimes, master and grandmaster level players will play a move such as king b8, just getting this king out of the potential diagonal of fire so that white really has less options available in the future. Here we just see the response of bishop b2, and now against g6, we see king e1, and now a very hyperdynamic option from black, and that is bishop h6. Now, bishop g7 honestly just looks a whole lot more normal, right? But this bishop on g7 is much less active than this bishop on h6, and the goal in chess is to activate your pieces as much as possible. This bishop on h6 pouncing down on the knight on d2, and we now see white preparing with this move of rook d1, giving this knight even more support and really looking to potentially fight for this d-file. Black then continues with rook he8, and we see white respond with bishop e2. Notice again, Nakamura cannot castle kingside because we have moved our king twice, but at the same time, white is holding this position together, and now black has to try to find a way to break through. And we see black try to do this with knight h5, a kingside maneuver trying to get this knight into f4. A move like g3 definitely would have been possible, trying to prevent this knight f4 idea, but instead we see this option of b5 from Nakamura, attacking the knight, followed by c4, simply expanding on the queen side. Knight f4 is played here, attacking the pawn on g2, and here we see the move of bishop f1, but I really quickly want to cover this idea of g3. Now, obviously, our pawn on g2 is attacked. White may have been tempted to play a move like g3, but guys, in chess, we got to be very careful to not move pawns in front of our king much of the time because they create big weaknesses. Now, on one hand, sure, we are attacking this knight, and that is a plus, but we just gave up two key squares, and those are the squares of g2 as well as h3, and black can take advantage of these right away by playing knight g2 check, followed by queen h3. This queen lining right up against the king on f1, and now looking at ideas like knight e3 with a double check. And here if we play king g1, black can actually just play knight e3 anyways, right? Threatening a mate in 1, attacking our queen, and also our rook on top of that. And notice if we capture the knight on e3, bishop takes e3 checkmate, and we have ourselves a game over. White is completely losing this position because we moved a pawn in front of our king and did not prioritize king safety. See, all that's one lesson that I think that we can get from this game by Nakamura. We got to be careful to prioritize our king and not allow our opponents to get even more weaknesses to go after. Here we see the move instead of bishop f1, simply defending the pawn on g2 and also holding on to that key h3 square, in which case we now see black capture on c4, and now after d takes c4, continue with f5, expanding on the king side and trying to break this game open. However, here Nakamura doesn't try to capture this pawn on f5 and only make black's job easier, but instead continues with c5 followed by c6, attacking both the queen and the bishop. Here black decides to get 2 pawns for a piece, and now white continuing with knight takes e5, attacking both the queen on g7 and this bishop on c6. And black can actually lose this game very quickly if they're not careful. I mean, if a move like queen d6 or queen e6, just getting the queen out of the way, we play knight takes c6 with check, and we pick off this rook on d8 as well. But here from black, we see the very best option, and that is the stunning knight d3 with check. Whole idea being if a move like knight takes d3, black has e takes d3 with another check, as this rook on e8 would be attacking our queen, as both the pawn on e4 and the knight on e5 would be out of the way. And if bishop takes d3, which is what we saw in the game, e takes d3 is played, attacking our queen and also putting pressure on e5. Notice that white here cannot capture the bishop on c6, acting like the knight is defending the queen, because again, this knight cannot move. So instead we see this idea of queen c4, and now Zhang continuing with bishop takes g2, attacking the rook, and following this rook sliding 1 step to the left, we see bishop b7, which is not a mistake by any means. Black is still winning this game, but I think that Zhang missed a key opportunity here that would have gave black an easy win, and that is queen h3. And sure, at first sight, this king on b8 may seem a little bit exposed and prone to attack. I mean, these light squares do appear to be somewhat weak, but at the same time, our knight on e5 again cannot even move, as is pinned to the king on e1. And this bishop on g2 is a surprisingly strong defender, covering key light squares like d5, c6, and b7. There's simply no way for white to get any kind of attacking chances here. And in fact, here black is looking to play queen takes h2 and simply capture our rook. Here the best move for white is actually just playing rook takes g2, just giving up the exchange. But if we play something like knight f1, trying to hold on to the pawn on h2, we actually lose more than we gain from that, because here we lose the knight, and the very next turn face an option like queen f3, threatening a mate in 1. And really, if we stop this with something like rook d2, we simply lose our rook. We face queen e2 with check, and this position is simply losing for black. So again, y'all, going back to this position, we see the move of bishop b7, but I do think that queen h3 would have given Zhang a very nice and easy win against Nakamura. But here we see from Nakamura queen h4, sliding the queen to the right and attacking this bishop on h6. And really, black here needs to play a move like bishop g7, attacking the already pinned knight, or even a move like queen b5, right? Attacking the bishop on b2 and this knight on e5 as well. But instead here we see the move of queen f5, and this move is simply a blunder. By doing this, Nakamura has officially reached an even evaluation with the Bongcloud against a super GM player, and that's simply by just capturing off this bishop on h6. Now after rook takes e5, bishop takes, and queen captures back, attacking the king. Here Nakamura doesn't need to play a move like knight e4, simply giving up a piece, or king f1, which would run into queen e2, checkmate, game over. But here was simply able to slide the queen back to e3, attacking the queen on h2, and all of a sudden in this current position we are down 3 pawns for an entire rook, and now black is on the edge of losing this thing. With white being up so much material, we see black capture on h2, attacking the rook on g1, and now Nakamura just slide this king over 1 square, defending the rook. And now following queen h5, we see f3. Why a move like f3? First off, our rook was attacked, and secondly, this pawn f3 move gives us a little bit more space to maneuver on the king side of the board. We see bishop c6, and now from white, queen g5. We are currently ahead of material, so we want to trade down. If we can do this, we are making the game much more simple for us. At this point in the game, we're down 4 pawns, but in return for that, we have our rook. And guys, I'm taking our rook over 4 pawns any day of the week, especially in a position like this where there's only 1 pawn on our side of the board, while this pawn on d3 can be captured in the very near future, especially following a queen trade. Here, black was very smart to not trade queens, which would make things only easier for Nakamura, and instead we see Zhang continue with queen h3 check, followed by queen h2. And here we see rook g2, simply attacking the queen and maintaining an attack on this rook. So now we obviously see this idea of queen d6, and now white continuing with rook e1. This knight on d2 is very well defended. There's no reason not to just throw this rook on the open file. And now following rook f8, we see king g1 really trying to prioritize king safety. Notice here that Nakamura is not in a rush, right? He's not trying to win this game in 10, 15, 20 moves even. He's simply trying to reach position, in which case he doesn't have to worry about potential checkmate threats or threefold repetition. Black then continues with rook f5. Here's Zhang just throwing this rook into the action, trying to create some kind of counterplay. But again, we're simply ahead a rook for 4 pawns. Let's just play this move of queen e7. Here's Zhang again decides not to trade queens, but by doing this pawn on d3, which is actually one of black's biggest assets in this position, simply gets picked off by queen d8 check, and now capturing off this pawn. Now we are ahead a rook for 3 pawns. Black then continuing with rook d5, and yet again we see queen e3 offering a trade. After queen h4, queen f2 offering a trade. Here white is really in no rush, and this queen getting a bunch of trade offers is really just forced to kind of run around the board like crazy. We see rook e3, black continuing with queen d1 check, and then just throwing this queen right back. And it's at this point in the game that we see white with this very solid and safe king on g1 continue with rook c3, trying to get more attacking ideas, specifically putting some pressure on this bishop. On c6, following rook h5, we see rook g4 pouncing against this queen on h5, and now following queen a5, we see queen c1. This move actually does 2 things. First off, it defends the rook on c3, which was being attacked, and secondly, it puts pressure on c6. Now here, black could have went with a move like queen b5, but in that case, something like knight b3 is very simple and easy. Actually looking to just play knight d4, attacking both the queen and the bishop. Black can throw in the towel here very soon. See how we don't see a move like queen b5 here from Zhang, which would give Nakamura the opportunity to just play something simple like knight b3 and knight d4, and there white with a very simple and 1 game. But instead we see this option of queen e5, very creative. And notice here how we did not see Nakamura capture this bishop on c6, because if he did this, he would simply run into threefold repetition or even lose this game. We see queen e3 with check, whole idea being if a move like king f1, rook h1 check is played, and we're about to lose a ton of material. And here, if a move like king g2, black's able to play queen e2 with check. Whole idea being if a move like king g1, okay, we're just going to go straight back to e3, and we're going to have a shuffle back and forth. And the moment that white continues here with king g3, black doesn't even get a draw, but actually gets the win with queen h2 checkmate. There's simply nowhere for this king to go. We got ourselves a game over. See, y'all, following this move of queen e5, we got to be careful in positions like this with a somewhat vulnerable king not to just capture this bishop on c6 and just hope that black doesn't have a perpetual check. Why not play a move here like knight f1, really solidifying the positioning of this king again by defending both e3 and h2 with the knight, and yet again reinstating the threat of attacking and really just capturing this bishop on c6. I mean, here there's really no rush to win this game. By protecting our king, we are fulfilling the main priority, and it's after this that we can start putting pressure on black. Here we see the move of queen e6, black simply trying to defend the bishop on c6, and look, we already got a double in and out, really attacking that light squared bishop. Why not make it a 3x2? Rook gc4, a triple battery ram, attacking that light squared piece. And the moment that this bishop moves, because obviously black just doesn't want to get that piece taken off the board, we see rook takes c7 with check, and following king a6, a4 from Nakamura, just going, look, take my pawn, I'm completely fine with that. That's only going to make your king more exposed. Here Zhang decides not to take the pawn and instead continues with bishop e2, but this simply runs into rook e3, attacking both the queen and that bishop. And following rook g5 check, we see king f2. And now after queen h3, we could win following this move of rook takes e2, but instead we see this option of king takes e2, and it's in this position that Zhang resigns, and we officially have a Bongcloud win against a 2700 plus rated player in a tournament game. Because here, if a move like queen g2 check, we have king e1, and if a move like rook g2 check, we have king d1. In both of those instances, black simply runs out of check, and all of a sudden this king is the main target of attack. So following this position of king takes e2, we simply see a resignation, and Nakamura walks away with the win. Thanks for watching, and thank you especially to all of you engaging on Patreon. Your donations are helping the Chess Giant team to continue developing more and better chess content. If you want to learn more about the extras you can unlock by subscribing at one of our Patreon tiers, hit up the link in the description if interested. Thanks for watching today's video. If you'd like to learn the theory behind the Bongcloud opening, click that video to the left. If you'd like to see my entire openings playlist, click that playlist to the right. Leave a comment down below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.